Welcome to Brotherhood, a spoiler-filled podcast where we review each episode of the deliciously nightmare-inducing TV show Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. My name is Timothy MacArthur, the taller brother.
My name is Dylan MacArthur, the older brother.
Today's episode, Created Feelings.
Or as I like to call it, thank Ishvala that storyline got wrapped up quick. Okay, so I think that this might be the most notes for an episode that I have written since episode 5. So this episode starts off right with the opening credits, which is interesting because ever since episode 2, I believe it is, we've always started off with a brief explanation of alchemy, what it is, and most importantly of all, the law of equivalent exchange, ending with that climactic line, "For what could equal the value of a human soul?" We begin after the recap with Edward sitting in his hospital, getting better, and Team Rocket at his side, and they're having their little scene together. And the note that I have here is, turns out, Team Rocket does more than just worry about whether or not they're going to get punished. Could we please have more of that?
I really like the part where they slap Edward in the face.
And tell him that he needs to start trusting adults more. That was...
But then it turns out they give him the information that they're afraid, because apparently alchemists have a very high rank.
Yeah, state alchemists are apparently the equivalent of majors. If I'll be honest, though, Tim, their incompetence was funny for the first episode that we saw them. It was bearable during the second episode. It was annoying in this one. And I just wanted more character from these two people.
They become more competent later on, trust me.
It's fine if they aren't perfectly capable from now on. We just need more moments to actually learn about them as people.
And if we learn about them, that does not mean them being the butt of every joke.
Exactly. I love when the guy starts talking to Edward about romance. It was like, all right, sure, that's fine. And I liked it because it's an insight into his character and what his priorities are without being a joke at his own expense. It's funny, but not because anyone is necessarily being hurt, just because it's not something that Edward wants to talk about.
I actually kind of like the exchange between Edward and Winry when Edward calls Winry.
The note that I have regarding that is, we're shaking things up with some farce. All right, I'm down. It's a particular kind of comedy in which the humor arises from misinformation and misplacement of identity. But in this case, particularly the fact that each character thinks that the other person knows information that they don't. And so there's this...
So in this case, it's because Winry thought that Edward knew that she didn't put the screw in a specific screw in his automail, and therefore that's why it broke. But like I said, Edward doesn't should be known. Edward doesn't really know this, and so
they're both playing a little bit more nice than they might normally because they're both in trouble. They just don't know what the other person is in trouble for, which is funny. Like, we haven't had that before. It's a nice way of shaking up their dynamic together and keeping things fresh.
Yeah, that was kind of funny.
After that, Edward gets a little tour of the hospital. I don't know why they move him. They just do.
Al shows up and Edward talks to him and, notices something's up but moves on. But then you see this little toy robot and I'm like, oh, I know where they're going with this.
That robot couldn't possibly be a symbol for something, could it?
I mean, it's obviously a symbol for something, for the suspicion that Alphonse had implanted in his head.
Well, the robot in this instance becomes a metaphor for what Alphonse thinks he is. He thinks that he is the robot, the metal man that is being controlled by simple mechanics. You do need to have a scene of Alphonse reacting to what Barry the Chopper has said to him.
But yeah, I think they did include a little too much of the moping. Just a little.
I think that it overstayed its welcome by just one scene. If they could have compressed his first two scenes down into one, it would have kept it just a touch tighter.
I would have been okay with keeping the scene where he's near the mirror.
Oh, absolutely. And that is some great blocking right there, that he's away from a mirror that he can look at his own reflection in.
And like, he has his hand up to the mirror and then breaks the mirror. That was good. Like he doesn't punch it like, they might have in other shows. He just
accidentally crushes it because he's a giant hunking suit of armor.
Yeah, exactly. He's a giant freaking suit of armor. Of course he did have problems with his own strength when he's emotional.
And then, but what to our wandering eyes should appear but a single Winry stepping off of the train. Now, I don't know if you have looked into the author of the original manga for Full Metal Alchemist at all, but I decided to.
I haven't.
I decided to do a little bit of research on my own, and apparently, she was actually raised on a farm in rural Japan, and it wasn't until much later in her life that she eventually went to the city.
That would actually explain why Ed and Al live in such a location.
I mean, that is some food for thought. But the other thing that I wrote down here is that Winry has a line about how uncomfortable the trains are. It made me wonder if, in this instance, Winry isn't a bit of a surrogate for the author in this story, that she sort of is putting her own experiences in this character.
Wait, did the author for the manga work on this show? I mean, it would make sense if she did.
I don't know if she had anything to do with this show. From what I've heard, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood was an attempt to be a much more faithful adaptation of the manga than the original series.
Okay.
I would imagine that her fingerprints would be much more present on this anime than the original one, just by virtue of it being a more faithful adaptation. I'm trying to be careful with how much I research about her career and the history of this franchise, because I don't want to accidentally come across any spoilers for what happens in the future.
You especially do not want to research anything pertaining to the next episode.
Especially because I have a note that is going to drive you crazy, but we're going to get there in a little bit. So she finds Armstrong, who, in a clever little joke, is the unmistakable sign that she is supposed to look for. They make the joke about, oh, you'll know once you see it. And sure enough, there is Armstrong standing like a tower in the crowd, just like, hello.
Yeah, you might have just put the Hulk in the crowd there. like just standing there.
Complete with disappearing shirt. Armstrong then takes Winry to the hospital to visit Edward, and we have the conclusion of our brief little farcical journey between Winry and Edward, when Winry discovers that, in fact, Edward doesn't know that she screwed up royally, and so she
screwed up. It's a pun because she,
didn't screw in the screw. This scene is hilarious. Edward is, of course, funny. Winry, Armstrong is hilarious. And then Al shows up to just kill the party.
Hooray for killing. It's not literal killing. Al doesn't show up and kill everyone. Spoiler alert, Al doesn't kill everyone.
He just kills the party. My note here, just hurry up and talk about your feelings, okay, dude?
Just hurry up and talk about your feelings now.
Trust me, Al, it'll all be better once you have a little heart-to-heart with your bro, okay?
I think his problem was that he doesn't know who to talk to. He doesn't really know who to trust because, Winry, Granny Paneko, I think her name was, Edward, those were the three closest people to him. He thinks they're lying to him. And I think the moping around might be because for the most part, he's unsure of what else to do.
The question comes up, of course, where is Winry going to stay? Because, apparently they didn't decide that they were going to figure that out before she came over. And Colonel Hughes offers to let her stay at his place and, have a little shindig there. A couple notes here. One, Colonel Hughes dressed like a normal person.
Yeah.
apparently people can also wear normal clothes in this universe.
Even if they're in the military. Maybe if you're a higher ranking official in the military, maybe you get certain perks. Like maybe you get to take part in casual Fridays or something. I don't know.
On Fridays, we wear Puce.
What's Puce?
That's so going to be the title of this episode.
On Fridays, we wear Puce. What's Puce, anyways?
It's a type of color. Also, this is the second time that Colonel Hughes has dragged a woman out of an office against her will. I feel like this guy should be arrested.
Well, I mean, he would be arrested if it weren't for the fact that he doesn't really do anything beyond dragging them out of the office against their will.
The very next scene is at the Hughes place, where it is Alicia's third birthday, and Winry's reaction.
Yeah.
I was wondering where they were gonna go. What's gonna be the punchline? And I love that she just falls head over heels for this little girl. It's just like, you are so adorable. I just want to dip you in my oil-stained coffee mug. Anyway, because she's a gearhead. The note that I have here is Alicia's so dead.
What?
That family is screwed. Somebody is going to die. My bet is on Alicia.
No comment. No freaking comment.
The post scene of this episode kind of threw my theory into question. It was like, maybe not Alicia, but yeah, that family is about to see some disaster. My guess is in the next episode. But we'll see. We'll see in a few minutes when we actually sit down to watch the episode.
Did we already talk about Alphonse talking about his feelings?
Not yet. But before that, we need to talk about Colonel Hughes talking to Winry. And he has this weird conversation about how, men they just don't talk about their feelings. They express themselves in other ways, which that conversation felt strangely
artificial
and chauvinistic. But
it's not true. At least not for me. I talk about my feelings.
Well, we're going to come back to that note in a minute.
I talk about my feelings.
Certainly.
I talk about my feelings. I talk about my feelings.
There's certainly a weird moment when Alicia is playing with a couple other boys her age, and then the dad comes in with a gun and says, if any of you kids mess with her, which was a little bit forced, but also kind of humorous.
Kind of funny, but if that happened in real life, dude, you'd be arrested again.
On multiple charges of being completely weird.
Of course, normally you wouldn't be able to be put to jail for that, but in the case of Maze Hughes, it would be totally fine.
So Winry says goodbye to the doomed Hughes family, and she goes to visit the hospital, where Al finally talks about what's been on his mind and says, I think that my feelings have been created and that all of y'all have been in on this, and this is what's been on my mind. And then Edward walks out awkwardly, which was like, okay, sure, do that, fine.
And then Winry explodes.
Which was,
in anger.
I got choked up a little bit, honestly.
I did too.
Her reaction, there was just something that was a little bit off, and I'm not even quite sure what it was, but there was...
I felt like they did not need to include her continually hitting Alphonse with the wrench so much. I thought that was a little like, okay, girl, you can stop hitting him with the wrench. You've made your point.
You can do 1 or 2 slow taps with the wrench, but if you're going to make a point that she has unleashed so much of her emotional energy that she is now exhausted, then just go for it. Don't draw it out any more than it has to be. Just go all out. She has unleashed everything that she had in that attack, and now she is completely spent. But for me, there was something about that flashback where we cut to Edward in the hospital bed talking about how he thinks that Al resents him. it just didn't land as fully as it should have.
I think they should have let the scene talk a little more, not Edward.
Or maybe they could have let just Winry deliver the whole thing instead of having a flashback.
Yeah, that could have been it.
Because ultimately, this moment is about them.
If they were to have the flashback, they should have had Ed talk a little less.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, the scene kind of speaks for itself.
There was too much dialogue saying the exact same thing over again. But still, overall, I think quite good, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's still a good episode.
Al then realizes his mistake and realizes, oh yeah, of course that wouldn't be the case.
And I like the part where Winry says, "March, go, now, talk to your little brother about your feelings." Okay, I'll go.
And he goes to talk to Ed about his feelings, and Ed is like, no talk, only fight. And they have their brief little sparring match, which Ed wins by virtue of Al not really trying, because he just wants to talk now.
And plus, he also blinds Al with a bed sheet, I think.
Which is an interesting moment, because you don't really know where the scene is going at that point. It's like, okay, so, all right, what's going on here? And it is a lovely little bit of misdirection, because it doesn't just delay the moment when they finally have their heart-to-heart. It also changes the tone of the story.
Well, it makes it a little bit more, I guess you could say, playful in a way.
It's also a little bit more vulnerable, because at this point, them talking about their feelings isn't them awkwardly trying to enter into, okay, now we're having a DTR moment. It's more of, okay, now we're exhausted from that fight.
Let's talk about our feelings.
Yeah. There's a natural progression from the sparring match to them actually talking. This brings me to my follow-up note from earlier, which is when Winry says, I guess some things just really aren't expressed with words, to which I wrote, what do you mean things are expressed without words? Did you miss that entire conversation, Winry?
And besides, what kind of human being doesn't notice this?
It's like, were you just magically struck deaf the moment they finished their sparring battle?
I mean, sure, some things do not need to be communicated through words, but in that instance, it had to be communicated through words. Otherwise, it wouldn't have worked very well.
Yeah.
Even Morse code would be better than a grunt.
They just say, sup, sup.
And then it's all good. No, that wouldn't have worked. Sorry, but it doesn't work that way. Although, now that we're almost done, I just want to let you know, I really like the bit where they're talking, and I really like the information given where the sudden bit of information where apparently it turns out they both fought over Winry.
Oh man, I loved that. Oh, thank you for bringing that up.
I thought that was really interesting.
And I love how they both agreed that it was probably going to be Al. I won that one. And then Scar.
Oh yeah, I remember that scene now.
There's a hazy flashback that we get, and I get the feeling that some key moments were cut out between the different shots in this little flashback that we get of Scar's past when he was in the land of Ishval. After this flashback, he wakes up in a cold sweat, and he's being taken care of by people who assure him that they would recognize an Ishvalan anywhere, to which I wrote, how do Ishvalans identify each other? Do they have cutie marks or something? Like,
I think that the thing is one, they have red eyes. I don't think that's very common in that show.
Oh, do all Ishvalans have red eyes?
Yeah, that tends to be a thing.
Okay.
They also tend to have dark skin, and I don't think that is...
Scar does not have dark skin.
Yeah, he does.
I mean, he's tan.
Sorry, he's tan, but like they have a tan or whatever because, you know, they come from a place where there was sun.
Okay.
And a lot of it.
That puts an interesting little kink in my next theory on Dylan's theorizing corner.
You mean like kink as in like it ruins it to some extent?
Not really, but it throws an interesting wrench into it. which comes at the very end when he pulls off the sheet and you see a tattoo on his arm, this long, intricate thing. And someone's like, that's a pretty cool tattoo you got going there. And Scar's
then he
like,
says,
it's a bond from my family. To which I wrote, a bond from your family, eh? Could it be, dun dun dun, your brother? A blood seal. I think it's a blood seal.
interesting theory. Again, no comment.
I honestly think, and please don't say anything, but
Don't worry, I'll put my hand over my mouth right now.
I've got the sneaking suspicion that Scar might also be two people. Just thinking. Anyway, that's all of my notes for this episode.
Can we end this episode now? Get to the next episode?
Yeah, I totally want to see what happens next.
Okay. Well, talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
Goodbye.
Bye.